there is one character who nobody can agree on. Sure, we've got our disagreements about timeline placement, or maybe which animatronics should or shouldn't have buttons, but if you really want to start an argument, just throw the name Cassidy into a discussion like a grenade and run. This entity exists in a constant flow state between multiple interpretations. Feels like you need a FNAF degree to line up all your beliefs in a shorthand before even starting a conversation.
Before we begin, I want you to understand that I subscribe to Golden Cassidy.
Ah, I see. Well, I find Cassidy Andrews' Toy Runaway to be quite compelling myself.
As I started writing this video, I found I was spending most of the word count explaining why I didn't think that Puppet Cassidy Aftonburger or whatever was correct, instead of actually presenting my theory. So, in respect to your time and making this video watchable, I'm not claiming to have solved anything. I won't be able to answer every question and square every circle. I am simply presenting some very interesting pieces of evidence I've found that might make you view this quantum superposition of a character in a new light. Let's start by going through everything we know about Cassidy from the game's timeline, which isn't much because pretty much everything comes from the survival logbook. In this book, as I'm sure you're well aware, we're shown two spirits communicating back and forth throughout the pages of Michael Afton's workbook from some time around FNAF 3. Cassidy's name comes from decoding a puzzle which occurs across several pages where she writes "my name" in faded text. I say she because only a few months after the survival logbook's release, the concluding entry to the FNAF novel trilogy, The Fourth Closet, included a girl with long black hair named Cassidy, counted amongst that continuity's MCI. Alongside her, we are introduced to an unnamed little boy in a black and white striped shirt who cries, which, to me, shows the character of Crying Child and Cassidy being separate entities. In the word search on page 58 of the survival logbook, it seems that the Crying Child spirit is trying to communicate with Cassidy, asking, "Who are you and what is your name?" which is presumably why Cassidy uses parts of unaltered text in the word search to provide the answer. Cassidy also communicates back to the Crying Child by asking him questions about his life, with the very first thing she writes being, "What do you remember?" It seems that throughout the logbook, Cassidy is trying to help Bite Victim remember who he is by prompting him to piece together his own memories. But here's something you've probably forgotten to ask. How does Cassidy know all this about the Crying Child? The community has sort of swept this question under the rug over the years, hand-waving it away with yada yada ghost powers, but for a moment, let's consider that there might be more to understand about Cassidy given how much she knows about the kid who seems to have been killed years before her. Take a closer look at some of the things she asked the Crying Child throughout the logbook. Was your favorite childhood toy a plastic purple telephone? This is an explicit reference to FNAF 4's Nightmares, where we see a purple and blue telephone toy as one of 3 important items laid out on the floor. So, Cassidy has somehow seen or is aware of this toy and its connection to the Crying Child. On page 83, next to a picture of Bonnie jamming out on his guitar surrounded by musical notes, Cassidy asks, "Is this song familiar to you?" This one's a bit more subtle, but it's actually a reference to the Fredbear and Friends TV show in FNAF 4, which, if you'll remember, was the only in-game 1983 reference. And on that TV show, we see this exact image, but in 8-bit. On page 75, when the book presents us with an image of the Fredbear plush, Cassidy asks, "Does he still talk to you?" This one is particularly interesting. Not only is Cassidy aware of the Crying Child having spoken to the Fredbear plush, something other characters in FNAF 4 are seemingly oblivious to, but that this character may still have the ability to commune with him in the afterlife. If we are right about this book being around FNAF 3, then he's been dead for over 30 years at this point. Why would his imaginary friend still talk to him? And why would Cassidy bring it up? Surely she could just ask if he remembers his friend or something like that. But you see, it's this question that led fellow theorist TDreads and I to uncovering Cassidy's secret connection to not only the Fredbear plush, but all of Crying Child's memories. You see, Cassidy isn't just helping Crying Child because they happen to bump into each other on the flip side. She's putting him back together because it's what she was made to do. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Who you gonna call? Psychic friend, whale plush. I said at the start of this video that I don't want to spend the whole time defending against counter theories, so I'm just going to present all the ways that Scott has been beating us over the head with William and Fredbear plush connections since FNAF 4. To start, in Sister Location we have a Fredbear plush with a handheld device next to the Nightmare Chamber screens. Some people think it's a walkie-talkie, but I personally think it's a remote, symbolically representing that the Fredbear plush is the one in control of the experiments. Whether you believe it's a walkie-talkie or remote isn't really important, because either way it shows that Afton equals the Fredbear plush. In the story Jaidephobia, which I'll have a lot to say about later, the Fredbear plush is actually replaced by a small bunny rabbit toy to further drive this symbolism home. We also have the designs of the Funtime animatronics themselves, who I think each represent a member of the Afton family. In this lineup, Funtime Freddy would represent the crying child, and what does he happen to have on his hand? A small bunny puppet who's telling him what to do. Later, in Ultimate Custom Night,
Toy Chica is William Afton.
In the final line of dialogue spoken in all of UCN's cutscenes, in a scene set by the tree under which the crying child is buried, Toy Chica says,
"But tomorrow is another day."
The Fredbear plush's signature catchphrase. The reason all of this is important is because presuming Afton is the plush, we can say for certain that he promises to put the crying child back together at the end of FNAF 4. But what does that actually mean? We see a weird meta abstraction of what that looks like in FNAF world, but what's literally happening on the flip side once you strip away all the crazy Scott Cawthonisms? What does being put back together actually entail? Our first hint at the mechanics behind putting someone back together comes from Sister Location, where Michael says that William specifically instructed him to do exactly that for his sister, Elizabeth. It seems that by this point in the timeline, William has in some way discovered the ability to interact with and manipulate the spiritual realm, as he and others have achieved in various ways across separate continuities. I have a whole theory as to what exactly Michael had to do to put Elizabeth back together, but it's a little complicated and I don't have time to go into it right now, but essentially I think it involves Michael having been injected with the remnant of Elizabeth and the MCI after he's scooped. Something similar happens in the fourth closet, where after having been injected with Remnant, Carlton can interact with the ghosts of the dead kids and helps put their broken pieces back together. However, as I went over in my last video, the circumstances surrounding the crying child's death are unique in that he lost his frontal lobe, which I argue means his breaking occurred before he ever flatlined. In Elizabeth's case, her remnant was being physically divided across multiple machines, which some people argue makes her situation completely different to the crying child. However, I think all of William's experimentation in the bunker was so that he could create a controlled environment in which he could learn the secrets of Remnant and recombining spirits. But you see, Crying Child's broken mind was a problem before he died, which means that reassembling him was a more arduous process than just gathering a bunch of soul juice and chucking it into Fredbear. Cece's ability to recall information was heavily damaged when he lost his frontal lobe, meaning there needed to be a much more hands-on approach to putting him back together. In FNAF World, we play as an entity who William says was made for one thing. William commands us through the spirit world to find the pieces of Crying Child and put them in place so that he can one day find his way back to his soul. And this is where Cassidy comes back in. Cassidy is who we play as in FNAF World. She was the one William made to put the Crying Child back together. But this wasn't just as simple as finding a random kid and tapping them to go find some memories. Oh no. What I'm about to show you indicates that William specifically designed the perfect victim to help the Crying Child. And who's better to help you remember who you are than yourself? On a podcast discussing all the secrets of Sister Location, fellow theorist TDreads and I started to analyze the nightmare chambers as seen in the private room and the breaker room map. We noted that not only are the FNAF 4 nightmares labelled as observation rooms, but so too are the house and Fredbear's family diner from the daytime minigames. They have the exact same detailing as one another, with a little white dot to indicate where the observed experiment victim would be placed. We know from the story Jaidephobia that these rooms are not just torture chambers, but are specifically designed to place the experiment victim in a very particular mindset, one of a young child, scared of animatronics, who wears black and white stripes. What I am suggesting is that William designed these nightmare chambers, which include daytime sections with fake sunlight, to not only terrify a young child, but to prime them with the memories of his dead son. I think that Cassidy was the one William put through these chambers, forced to relive not only the crying child's life leading up to his death, but also his nightmares of these monstrous machines. Also that once William killed her inside a Golden Freddy, she would have everything she needed to put his son back together on the other side. Now, I'm sure that all of you want to point out that we hear the FNAF 1 phone call during FNAF 4 and that Michael draws Nightmare Fredbear in the logbook. Surely that means he is the one who experienced those nightmares, right? Well, yes and no. I don't think Michael ever actually experienced the experiments firsthand, but instead, what we play in FNAF 4 is Michael reliving Cassidy's traumatic memories. Earlier we went over how Michael, after having been scooped by Ennard, is in contact with the spirit world, and thanks to Remnant, is able to put Elizabeth back together. What I would like to suggest is that the remnant of both Cassidy and the Crying Child were also in the mix. Golden Freddy seems to always follow around the other MCI victims, so if they're all smushed up in Ennard, it'll explain why Yendo can't appear in the private room on night 5. In the survival logbook, we see that Michael is experiencing the nightmares around the time of FNAF 3, and later in the book he even helps Cassidy with her name word search puzzle, which doesn't really make much sense unless you consider his potential tie to the spirit world through all that leftover remnant. It also explains why these two spirits, who should be able to communicate on their own, are imprinting on Michael's logbook specifically. They are within him, so they are communicating through his possessions. The nightmares we play in FNAF 4 are dreams conjured by the remnant of the MCI, Crying Child, and Cassidy. None of the ghosts are literally the nightmares, but their experience is manifested by their remnant, which is why, in Sister Location, Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare are not real animatronics. Now to clarify, I don't think Nightmare is literally Cassidy's ghost, but is instead a manifestation of her pain, of her fears. Now, all of that might sound insane, and it is, but if we look back at the series through this fresh lens, everything starts falling neatly into place. For starters, we finally have a solid explanation for how Cassidy knows so much about Dave's life. It's not that she can just use ghost magic to bypass the broken memories, which would sort of undermine Dave's unique role in the story. Instead, when Cassidy asks her questions in the logbook, she's trying to identify the child she's supposed to help. As she does this, she's simultaneously filling in the gaps in his memory with the things William showed her in the experiment chambers. Was your favorite childhood toy a plastic purple telephone? Is this song familiar to you? Does he still talk to you? With this final question, Cassidy's not just asking if Crying Child has heard from William, she's asking if she's the only one who can hear him after death. If you're not convinced, take a look at the page directly across from the word search, which is clearly haunted by the Crying Child. It's a mirror. Fellow theorist Hyperdroid solved this particular puzzle by taking Crying Child's responses to some of Cassidy's prompts and then using them as coordinates in the Foxy grid. Then, if you reflect those letters, you get the answer D-A-V-E, making it so that these two pages provide the name of both spirits haunting the logbook. Both Cassidy and Dave share a reflection. What do you see? Cassidy. Cassidy was sent into the spirit world to help the Crying Child piece together his broken memories with the blanks left behind in her constructed experience. Don't believe me? Well, I don't blame you. This is probably the most insane theory I've ever entertained, but there's actually even more evidence. In FNAF 3, throughout the minigames, which clearly represent memories of the Crying Child's experiences, we collect pieces of the MCI's souls, which culminate in Happiest Day, a minigame where a crying child sits at the far end of a birthday table. Bringing all the souls together in one place allows them to move on from their tormented afterlife and finally be at rest. But what has this all got to do with Dave? Why are the MCI so heavily involved in setting him free? Well, I think that this was William's plan all along. At the end of FNAF 4, when we see the Fredbear plush promise Dave that he'll put him back together, the plush's text color changes from its usual yellow to a slightly different shade. But this color is not random, it's specifically the same color as was used by the Pigtail Girl in an earlier minigame. The Pigtail Girl is the one who tells the Crying Child that the animatronics come to life at night, and if you die, they hide your body and never tell anyone. I think this text color change is not to indicate a different speaker, but instead show us that the promise William makes to his son is directly related to what this girl says. William commits the MCI specifically to help put his son back together. In Ultimate Custom Night, where, once again,
Toy Chica is William Afton,
we see Chica go from student to student, killing and stealing parts of their bodies. We see that she's already struck the day prior due to a Foxy hook sticking out of her bag at the start of the story. I'm not the first to point out that Foxy being the first victim victim could absolutely represent what happened to Dave, and if Chica is collecting pieces of her victims, one must ask, what are those for? And why end the minigame with the Fredbear plush's catchphrase?
Tomorrow is another day.
Well, I think that this is to represent William literally piecing his son back together with the remnant of the MCI, which is why the FNAF 4 ending has the plushies slowly fading out one by one. Now, I already said that Remnant is not the full answer to reassembling the Crying Child. Whatever Cassidy is doing in FNAF World is clearly part of putting the pieces in place. If I had to guess, I think she's assigning parts of what's left of the Crying Child to each of the MCI, as these minigames that she's setting up lead us to each of the spirits. To further support this, in Help Wanted 2, to achieve the Golden Freddy memory plushie, you must combine the first 4 flavors of soda, orange, yellow, red, and purple, and then you take the Sodaroni can, which is set away from the others, and add that into the mix. If you take note of those first 4 colors, they actually line up with the same order of characters at the table in Happiest Day: Freddy, Chica, Foxy, Bonnie. Curiously, the white ingredient, which would presumably represent the puppet in this lineup, is not added into the drink. Instead, this Sodaroni can, which in this lineup would represent the kid on the other end of the table, has a very important detail hidden on its label. Established 1986. That's an odd year for the developers to call out, or actually it's odd because it's even, because only odd years seem to be very important in FNAF lore. 75, 79, 83, 85, 87, 93, so why 1986? Well, it's because our last component, Cassidy, was not killed on that fateful day in 1985. She went missing and was kept alive in the Nightmare Chambers for an entire year. In case you think that's a stretch, remember, Didophobia showed us that the Nightmare Chambers are self-sustaining, to the point where Rory, the victim of the nightmares in that continuity, was trapped in them for over 10 years without faltering. So, okay, does this mean that Cassidy is the receiver of Happiest Day? That would kind of throw this whole theory out the window, right? Well, not exactly. Jumping back to the survival logbook, one thing I never see brought up about Cassidy's side of the conversation is that she's only ever asking questions until her very last appearance in the book. The party was for you, a statement, to which Dave responds, it was for me. I think that this one interaction is what the entire book is leading up to. It's why it's the very last thing Cassidy says, because this is Cassidy fulfilling her purpose. The Crying Child, having been broken from his death, cannot move on. His mind is too shattered to simply piece his memories back together. So William creates Cassidy to act as a sort of carrier for Crying Child's memories. Cassidy's purpose is to forfeit her own rest, so that the Crying Child can take her memories, which fit just neatly enough in his broken mind, and move on. The minigames in FNAF 3 represent aspects of the Crying Child's broken mind being reunited, but they ultimately lead to a false memory. Happiest Day is not the Crying Child's birthday, it's Cassidy's, with Dave Afton's spirit having been plastered over the little girl. But how can I say this? Surely the memory represents a reversal of the Big Bite, which symbolically, yes, it does, but in truth, we're seeing why Cassidy was designed this way, because it specifically does fit in overriding what really happened. How do we know this? Well, take a look at these character masks of the other kids in the restaurant. Within FNAF 3, we are told in the training tapes that just before the MCI, the location was flooded with characters who were questionably appropriate for a Freddy's location. We also have the puppet present at the birthday, who was only ever active at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and would you look at that, the survival logbook shows the puppet presenting a cake to a little girl on her birthday, on a page dealing with Happiest Days. A page where Cassidy specifically asks if the bite victim remembers his name, which leads to all the reflection stuff we already went over. This was the birthday where Cassidy was kidnapped, the last time she felt happiness before it was snatched away from her by an evil man. And in one final act of cruelty, William forces her to give up that memory. The party is no longer for Cassidy, because as she manages to convince Dave, the party was for you. This story would somewhat parallel what happens to Jake in Fazbear Frights. In the Stitch Wraith epilogues, Jake gives his own happy memory to Andrew, which allows him to be freed from their amalgam body and traps Jake on Earth. Now, we could leave things off there. This is the bulk of the theory, but I feel like we really have to address that loose thread that you're all wondering about: the vengeful spirit.
Under this theory, all the connections between the bite victim and the one you shouldn't have killed are transferable to Cassidy, as she was forced to live out the crying child's life in the nightmare chambers. For those of you who want to argue about why Cassidy would appear as a blonde boy, one could argue that her ghostly visage has been literally overwritten by the crying child's appearance, as William's whole plan was to create a reflection of his son. Or, she's just not a girl in the games and just looks like that. Anyway, there are several FNAF World references in the game, including the reappearance of Old Man Consequences. We meet him taking the form of the FNAF World player character, who, remember, we've theorized to be Cassidy.
Leave the demon to his demons. Rest your own soul. There is nothing else.
The main menu music for UCN is called isotrophobia, which means, and I can't believe I'm saying this, an intense, irrational fear of mirrors. Now, of course, the most obvious interpretation of this is that William is facing the consequences of his actions, facing himself, or something like that. But the fact that the survival logbook only came out a few months before this game and featured a mirror very prominently is interesting. Throughout the game, there are also several voice lines which work really well under this theory.
This is how it feels, and you get to experience it over and over and over again, forever. I will never let you leave.
This line works really well if Cassidy had been experimented on and forced to live through a UCN of her own, and now she's turning the tables on William and forcing him to survive through the same sort of thing.
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed.
The nightmares should only really be known to somebody who experienced the chambers firsthand, so Cassidy would be the perfect candidate to recreate everything she saw in them.
We've only just begun. I will never let you leave. I will never let you rest.
Makes sense for someone who was kept up at night by terrifying monsters and who can no longer rest their soul because of what William has done. Also, the fact that Cassidy speaks through the mediocre melodies of all characters could link back to those questionably appropriate mascot costumes that were present on her happiest day. Nightmare, representing the evil that Cassidy experienced firsthand, is a manifestation of her agony, appearing in this dreamscape to torture William. But that's not the only interesting thing that Nightmare has to say.
The shadow fears me.
That's a weird line. We always assume Nightmare was Shadow Freddy, the Shadow, given that's the name of his game mode in FNAF 4. But what if... Oh no.
Okay, so I'm not here to completely uproot Golden Duo, but I do have a slightly alternative suggestion that you can take with or without believing Cassidy is a part of Golden Freddy. I think if Cassidy is the vengeful spirit, then we have to take that final UCN cutscene to mean that she was almost certainly killed in Golden Freddy. But I'm not so sure that she is Golden Freddy. I think given her relationship to the crying child, that of a mirror image created by the purple guy, that there's a strong argument for Cassidy being Shadow Freddy. Think about it, if Crying Child is Golden Freddy, then the purple version of Golden Freddy who appears in Follow Me on every night, except the one where the vengeful spirit traps William in the back room, might indicate that Cassidy's ghostly form is in fact Shadow Freddy. Some people argue that Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie are agony manifestations from different events in the FNAF timeline, except the name Shadow Bonnie is not official. Shadow Freddy is, but every other Shadow in the timeline takes the form of a full black phantom with a name created by smashing random keys on the keyboard. Don't talk to me about the Freddy Files or whatever, those books are messy. Shadow Freddy, on the other hand, is purple and is technically the only Shadow animatronic in the games. If what Nightmare says is true, that the Shadow fears him, he can only be referring to one entity, Shadow Freddy, aka Cassidy, aka the Vengeful Spirit. That's why Nightmare, who is a nightmarish version of Cassidy, is the color inversion of Fredbear, who is a nightmarish version of the Crying Child. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, it's impossible for any one theory to perfectly solve everything in the games. I'm sure you're all going to enjoy poking holes in this theory, which is great because theories ultimately are just that, fun concepts which arrange the evidence in a way that can explain something. Eventually though, you're going to hit a wall in any theory signposted with "will be explained later" or "seamless retcon," so very few theories can accurately predict every twist and turn Scott has devised behind the scenes. All I'm saying is that if in Ruin 2, Cassidy turns out to be a Cassidy parallel and ends up in the FNAF 4 Nightmare Chambers underneath the Pizzaplex, I'll be very vindicated. Anyone who wants to refer to this theory in the future can do so under a few different names: Cassidy Experiments, Mirror Toy Shink, Cassasoderoni, another David, and yep, that's done it. That's pushed it over the edge. I've now enraged everyone in the theorist community and ruined my cred forever. Okay, great. Bye!